name's Michael McCarthy. I'm the director of the Golden Dragon.
And I'm Geoffrey Paterson, and I'm the conductor.
We thought we'd have a look at the themes of the opera in this video for you, where we think about what's in the piece, what we're trying to say to the audience with it. And one of the things that fascinates me is the combination of comedy and darkness. The piece starts in a very comic, sort of farcical way with the extraction of a tooth. It's a kitchen setting, there's a little boy, he has bad toothache, he has no money, he has no papers. This is all done quite innocently. The rest of the cooks decide the best thing to do is to get the wrench from behind the boiler and pull his tooth out. Inevitably, this leads to total disaster, but it's played out as a comic book scene, really. And I think that's borne out in the way that the music portrays this action.
It's extraordinary. A lot of the music in the first part of the piece it's like music for a cartoon. It really is. It's quite extraordinary. The scenes in the kitchen with this story of the tooth. Also, the first scene in the parallel story of the cricket and the ant. This Aesop's fable, as it were. It starts off really as a comedy with music that wouldn't be out of place in The Simpsons.
The tireless ant just worked and worked.
And as the piece goes on, the colours of the music become more serious and become darker. But it's only in the very last part of the piece where all those comic musical touches are abandoned. It's very clever on the part of the composer, the way this is paced, that as the story becomes darker and more upsetting, the music itself becomes less and less comic.
And the comedy in the music is the sorts of things you wouldn't be surprised to find in a Disney cartoon. You know, wah-wah mutes on the brass and gestures and cartoon imagery.
Absolutely. He's not shy, Eötvös, of using very, very descriptive musical effects. You know, these wah-wah mutes to give a kind of idea of the big city to an extent, but also just, you know, the wah-wah-wah-wah-wah laughter in the orchestra. There's a rather grotesque moment that, particularly when I heard it with the orchestra last week when we started to rehearse, that it's just a sequence of farts. You know, 12 farts, one after the other, as the old man visits the prostitute for the first time. I mean, it's gross, and it's completely open and comic and deliberately funny, and with no guile about it at all. It's brilliant.
So this comedy masks an underlying, much more visceral, much darker drama, whereas the story of the little one really represents the plight of an illegal immigrant who's working undercover, if you like, who has no access to facilities, to all the things that we expect in society, no money, no papers, as they say, and is therefore extremely vulnerable to exploitation. But this is not political theatre of the 1960s. This is not agitprop. This is not theatre that sets out to tell you how to think. This is theatre that does it through storytelling and through fable, so that the comedy carries with it a great message. I actually quite like comparing this opera to a kind of operatic Simpsons. You know, the Simpsons are crazy yellow creatures on television who are doing this madcap family stuff, but underneath it are actually quite strong and quite serious messages that go on, and sometimes quite subversive message that happens. And in this, the message is not subversive at all. It's about how subversive society can be. It's about the fact that exploitation and utter poverty and utter degradation happens right under our noses across Western society, that we choose or care not to notice.
And I think the underlying theme of the piece, which is, well, the metaphor of the tooth running through, has several aspects to it. One is the idea of uprooting. The tooth is literally pulled out from its roots. The other is simply of common humanity, and I think you're absolutely right. It's not, although there are some aspects of the piece that are very reminiscent of Brecht, and that's obviously, at least structurally, where some of the aspects of it come from. The alienation, the fact that the orchestra read out some stage directions, as the piece goes along, which is in the original play as well. But it doesn't tell you what to think. It's not didactic. It presents essentially the theme of common humanity and makes you think without telling you what to think. And I think you mentioned The Simpsons, another interesting thing that has begun to occur to me is the relationships over the film like Pulp Fiction, which is simultaneously hilarious and horrifying, and also plays with an audience's expectations of structure. Numerous different interconnected stories that you're not quite sure either which order the events occur in or what the relationship between these different stories are. And when you get to the end, say when you get to the end of Pulp Fiction, you've got an idea of what's gone on, but you need to watch it again to work out exactly where that belonged to that. And this piece is very similar in a way. When we get to the end, we understand that all these links have related to each other and have presented this unified picture. But exactly how all the things fit together is what we hope that the audience will leave the theatre thinking about.
I think so. The fact that there's a story set in the kitchen of a Chinese restaurant and there's a parallel story about a cricket and an ant can sit side by side in an opera and ultimately make sense is extraordinary. These two completely different worlds. And what we discover is the cricket becomes one of the exploited individuals, one of the exploited girls. And there are a couple of dark moments during the opera. You know, the cricket is sexually exploited, and this is terrible, except it's also a cricket. So you're able to look at it through a distancing effect, and yet it feels all the more terrible because you actually end up feeling quite fond towards the cricket.
Yes.
You know, the cricket's a rather innocent, smiling little creature who's come to this place, and it's the last thing in the world she's expecting. And of course, in the piece, the cricket is played by a man, which adds another layer of both comedy and theatrical distancing, if you like, that allows the audience to watch the events without feeling that we're being realistic or nasty. We're just telling a story that they're allowed to think about afterwards.